The air was thick with the scent of roses and vanilla, the soft hum of a violin quartet echoing through the grand ballroom. Candles flickered along the aisle, their golden glow casting dancing shadows on the silk-draped chairs. It was the perfect wedding, my perfect wedding. Or at least, it was supposed to be. I stood at the altar, my hands tightly gripping the bouquet, my heart pounding louder than the organ playing in the background. My fiancé, James, smiled at me, his gaze warm and reassuring, but I could feel the weight of something pressing down on my chest. Something heavy, something dark. Then, just as the officiant cleared his throat to begin, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "Stop the wedding!" Gasps rippled through the crowd as every head turned. My sister, Emily, stood there, her face flushed with triumph, her lips curled into a smirk. The room fell into a stunned silence as she took a slow step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to my doom. I felt my stomach twist. No, she wouldn't. Not here. Not now. Emily raised a hand, holding up her phone as if it contained a weapon of mass destruction. Before we all celebrate this so-called love story, I think everyone deserves to know the truth about the bride. Murmurs erupted in the crowd. My mother's face drained of color. My father clenched his jaw. James frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. I swallowed hard, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I knew exactly what she was about to say. Emily had been holding on to my biggest secret, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy me. And she had chosen today, my wedding day, to unleash it. But what she didn't know was that I had a secret of my own. A truth so shocking that it would leave her, and everyone else in the room, completely speechless. And when it came out, Emily would be the one begging for forgiveness. The moment Emily spoke, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. My grip on the bouquet tightened, my knuckles turning white. I could feel James staring at me, waiting for an explanation, but I couldn't look at him, not yet. Emily took slow, deliberate steps toward the altar, the smirk on her face widening as she basked in the attention. This wasn't just about exposing me, she was enjoying this. She wanted me humiliated, broken, ruined. "Cass Sid," she drawled, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You didn't think you could just walk down the aisle, say I do, and pretend like you're not hiding something, did you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to stay calm. "Emily, this isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it is." She turned to face the crowd, her eyes gleaming. "Everyone, let me tell you a little story about my dear sister." James took my hand, his grip firm, steady. "Cass Sid, what's going on?" I opened my mouth, but Emily cut me off. "Oh, she won't tell you, James. She never tells anyone the truth. But don't worry, I'll do it for her." I could hear my mother whispering something urgently to my father, their hushed voices blending with the murmurs of the guests. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others leaned forward, eager for the spectacle. I turned to James, my heart pounding. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "just trust me." His brows furrowed, but he nodded. Emily let out a dramatic sigh. "Fine. Since Cass Sid won't be honest, I'll do it for her. Let me introduce you all to the real bride, a liar, a fraud, and someone who has been keeping a very big secret from her own fiancé." Gasps rippled through the guests again. My mother stood abruptly, her face pale. "Emily, that's enough." Emily ignored her. She raised her phone and tapped the screen. "James, do you recognize this number?" James pulled out his own phone and glanced at it. His eyes darkened. "That's my best friend's number." Emily's smirk widened. "Exactly." She turned her phone toward the crowd, the screen lighting up with a series of text messages. "Cass Sid has been texting him, a lot. And not just friendly little messages, either. She's been meeting up with him behind your back, James." I sucked in a sharp breath. My stomach twisted painfully as I saw the familiar texts on the screen, the ones I had sent just a few nights ago. The ones that could be completely misinterpreted. James' grip on my hand loosened. "Cass Sid." His voice was barely above a whisper. The entire room was spinning. My sister had planned this, calculated it down to the second. And yet, She had no idea what she had actually just done. I lifted my chin and took a deep breath. Yes, Emily. I have been texting James' best friend. Because I was planning something, a surprise. For James. Emily's smirk faltered. I asked his best friend to help me set up a honeymoon destination James has always dreamed of. He told me he'd been too busy to plan it himself, and I wanted to do something special. I turned to James, meeting his eyes. That's what I was doing, James. I wanted it to be a surprise. Emily's confident expression wavered. That's not true. I pulled out my own phone and held it up for James to see. I scrolled through my messages, showing him the ones she hadn't bothered to screenshot. The ones where I talked about the flights I booked, the special activities, the way I wanted to make it unforgettable for him. James stared at the messages, his expression unreadable. Then, he exhaled sharply and turned to Emily. You tried to sabotage my wedding with this. His voice was eerily calm, but there was an edge to it, a dangerous one. Emily took a step back, her face flushing. I didn't know. No, you didn't know, I cut in, my voice stronger now. Because you never cared to ask. You were so eager to ruin me that you didn't even think that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the villain in your little story. A murmur rippled through the guests. Some looked at Emily with disapproval, others whispered amongst themselves. My mother shook her head, disappointment clear on her face. Emily, how could you? Emily's mouth opened and closed, searching for something, anything, to say. But for the first time in a long time, she had nothing. I took a step closer to her, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You wanted to destroy me, Emily. But instead, you just revealed who you really are. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. I turned back to James, who was still staring at me, something unreadable in his expression. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought he wouldn't believe me, that despite everything, the seed of doubt had been planted. Then, he reached for my hand and squeezed it. I believe you. Relief flooded my body. Emily's face crumpled. And just like that, the tables had turned. The room remained tense, the silence thick and suffocating. Emily stood frozen, her face a mix of shock and anger, as if she couldn't comprehend how her carefully planned sabotage had just backfired so spectacularly. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing down on me, but the only one that mattered was James. His hand was still in mine, steady and reassuring. Emily, my mother's voice broke through the silence, filled with disappointment. I can't believe you would do something like this. At your sister's wedding. Emily finally snapped out of her stupor, her lips curling into a defensive sneer. I thought I was doing him a favor, she spat, motioning toward James. I was trying to protect him from marrying a liar. I exhaled sharply. No, Emily. You were trying to ruin my happiness because you hate seeing me happy. That's all this has ever been about. James, still holding my hand, turned toward her, his voice dangerously calm. You knew exactly what you were doing, Emily. You didn't even care whether the truth you were exposing was real or not. You just wanted to cause pain. Her eyes flickered with something, shame? Guilt? But then, she clenched her jaw and scoffed. You're both acting like I'm the villain here, but let's not forget who has been sneaking around behind her fiancé's back. My patience snapped. I wasn't sneaking around. If you had even bothered to ask me, instead of playing detective, you would have known the truth. Emily's nostrils flared. You always play the victim, Cass said. Always. But you're not as innocent as you pretend to be. I took a slow breath, my fingers tightening around James for support. You're right, Emily, I said, my voice quieter now, but firm. I'm not innocent. Because I've spent years allowing you to manipulate me, to humiliate me, to make me feel small just so you could feel better about yourself. And I never fought back. Until now. Her face twisted in rage. Oh please. You're just. Enough. My father's voice thundered through the room. It was the first time he had spoken, and the sheer authority in his tone silenced everyone. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Emily, I have put up with your behavior for too long, but this. He gestured around the room. This is unforgivable. Emily's mouth fell open. Dad. No, his voice was sharp. You ruined your sister's moment out of spite. You've crossed the line. She looked around, as if searching for an ally, but no one came to her defense. The guests had begun murmuring amongst themselves, and the judgment in their eyes was evident. For the first time, Emily looked small. Her gaze darted back to me, her lips trembling. But there was still one last flicker of defiance in her eyes. Fine, she muttered. You all want me to be the villain. Then so be it. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. The moment she disappeared, the weight on my chest lifted. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the crowd, and then, quietly at first, applause broke out. It was hesitant, awkward, but it grew until it filled the space. I blinked in surprise. People were actually supporting me. James turned to face me fully, a small smile playing at his lips. Sid, he murmured. Are you okay? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I think so. His fingers brushed against my cheek. Are you sure you still want to go through with this? His voice was careful, gentle. If you need a moment, I understand. I stared at him, my heart swelling. The only thing I need is you. His face broke into a grin. Then let's get married. The officiant, who had been standing frozen in shock through the entire ordeal, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Well, that was eventful. Shall we continue? A ripple of laughter passed through the guests. And just like that, we did. As I spoke my vows, I felt stronger than I ever had before. James was my future, and nothing, not even Emily, could take that away from me. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Emily wasn't the kind of person to let things go. And the war she had just started. I had a feeling it was far from finished. The ceremony continued, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily wasn't done. My instincts had been sharpened over years of enduring her cruelty, and even though she had left the ballroom, I knew my sister too well, she wouldn't go down without a fight. As James and I exchanged vows, my hands trembled slightly. I forced myself to focus on his voice, on the way his eyes softened when he said, I do. But in the back of my mind, a dark cloud lingered. When the officiant finally pronounced us husband and wife, applause erupted. My heart soared, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe that I had won, that Emily had finally been put in her place. But then, the doors swung open. A slow, deliberate clap echoed through the hall, cutting through the cheers like a blade. I turned. Emily stood there, a venomous smile twisting her lips. She had changed out of her wedding-appropriate dress, now wearing something sharp, bold, threatening. Beautiful, she sneered. Truly. But I wasn't quite finished. James tensed beside me. Emily, leave. Oh no, no, no. I left too soon before, she said, shaking her head. I didn't give Cassid's biggest secret the grand reveal it deserves. The room fell into uneasy silence. My mother paled. My father's jaw clenched. I could feel James stiffen beside me, and my stomach churned violently. Emily pulled her phone out again, waving it in the air like a trophy. I did some digging after I left. Her eyes met mine, and I felt my blood run cold. And I found everything. I swallowed hard. Emily. Oh, don't look so worried, dear sister. I just figured James might want to know who he really married before he gets too comfortable. My pulse pounded in my ears. You don't know what you're talking about. Emily laughed. Oh, but I do. I found the adoption records. A stunned gasp swept through the guests. James turned to me sharply, confusion flickering in his gaze. Adoption? He echoed. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Emily's smile was cruel. Tell him, Sid. Tell him who you really are. My throat tightened. I was going to tell you, James. I swear. But it was too late. Emily took a slow, taunting step forward. You see, James, your lovely wife. She tilted her head, pretending to look sympathetic. She isn't really Sid Monroe. She was adopted. Her real name, her real identity, was completely erased. Even she doesn't know where she came from. Murmurs broke out in the crowd, hushed whispers laced with shock and intrigue. James' face was unreadable, but his grip on my hand had loosened. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I was adopted. I never knew my birth family, and my parents, they never told me the details. My chest tightened. It never mattered to me before, because I always knew who I was. Until now. Emily let out a mocking chuckle. So many lies, she mused. So many secrets. I turned to James, searching his face for understanding. I was going to tell you, but I was scared. I didn't know how to say it. James' gaze flickered between me and Emily, his expression torn. James, Emily continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction. If she kept this from you, what else is she hiding? Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. That's enough, I said, my voice steady now. You wanted to humiliate me, Emily. Fine. You win. I turned to James. I should have told you. I should have trusted you with this sooner. But if this changes the way you see me, my voice wavered. Then I understand. For a moment, he didn't say anything. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, James stepped forward and pulled me into his arms. I don't care where you came from, he murmured. I care about who you are. A sob escaped me as I clung to him. Emily's face twisted in rage. Are you serious? You're just going to forgive her? James turned to her, his expression hard. Cassid didn't lie to me, Emily. She was scared. There's a difference. Emily's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. You lost, I told her softly. Not just today, but a long time ago. You let your hatred for me consume you. And now. I let out a breath. You have nothing. For the first time, I saw something break in Emily's eyes. She had come here expecting to destroy me. Instead, she had destroyed herself. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the hall. And this time, she didn't come back. You said. The moment Emily left, the weight in my chest lifted. It wasn't complete relief, not yet, but the storm had passed. I turned to James, my eyes searching his for any trace of doubt, but all I saw was warmth, love, and something deeper than before. Understanding. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, and a ripple of laughter swept through the guests. The tension had not fully faded, but there was a shift, one of solidarity. The people in that room had just witnessed my deepest secret being thrown into the light, yet instead of shame, I felt something entirely unexpected. Freedom. James took my hands in his again, a soft smile tugging at his lips. So, are we officially married yet, or did your sister just crash the wedding for no reason? The audience chuckled, and I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. We are absolutely, definitely married. The officiant, who had remained frozen throughout the chaos, finally composed himself. Well, in that case, he said with a bemused expression, I believe I can now officially present you as husband and wife. The room erupted into applause, and this time I let myself soak it all in. The reception that followed was a blur of emotions. Guests congratulated us, some offering awkward reassurances, others, especially the ones who had never been particularly fond of Emily, openly expressing their disdain for her actions. My mother, still shaken, pulled me into a tight hug. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, she whispered. I should have seen this coming. I held her tighter. It's not your fault, Mom. Emily made her own choices. She nodded but looked troubled. I just hope she realizes what she's lost before it's too late. I wasn't sure about that. Emily had spent years poisoning our relationship, convincing herself that I was the enemy. Would she ever change? I didn't know. And for the first time in my life, I realized it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. As the night went on, James barely left my side. Every time I looked at him, I found myself falling in love with him all over again. He didn't care about the past I didn't know, or the family secrets I couldn't uncover. He cared about me. At one point, we slipped away from the reception to get a moment alone. The cool night air wrapped around us as we stood on the balcony, city lights twinkling in the distance. James turned to me, his hands warm as they cradled my face. "Cass Sid," he murmured, "I don't care where you came from. You are my family now. And nothing will ever change that." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or sadness. They were from love. From relief. "I love you," I whispered. He kissed me softly, sealing every unspoken promise between us. Emily had tried to ruin this day, to unravel my happiness. But instead, she had done the exact opposite. She had freed me from her shadow. And as I stood there, wrapped in the arms of the man who truly saw me, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. As James and I stood on the balcony, wrapped in the glow of city lights and the warmth of each other, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. For years, I had let Emily's shadow loom over me, allowing her words to pierce my confidence and her actions to dictate my emotions. But tonight, she had played her final hand. And I had won. The wedding reception continued inside, laughter and music spilling into the night. I could hear my father's deep chuckle, my mother's soft voice, and the clinking of glasses as our guests celebrated. Despite the chaos, despite the storm Emily had tried to bring, love had prevailed. James ran his thumb over my cheek, his gaze steady. "You're thinking too much," he murmured, his lips curving into a smirk. I let out a small laugh, leaning into his touch. "I just never imagined it would end like this," I admitted. "That I'd be standing here, finally feeling free." His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close. "You are free, Cass Sid. You always were. You just needed to see it." I exhaled, the weight of the past slowly lifting. He was right. My past, my origins, the sister who had tried so hard to tear me down, none of it defined me. I wasn't trapped by secrets anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was standing in my truth. A gust of wind brushed past us, carrying the sounds of the celebration with it. I tilted my head, listening to the joy coming from the people who truly cared for me. My real family, the one I had chosen, the one that had chosen me. Emily had left, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what she might do next. That battle was over. And as James laced his fingers through mine and whispered, "Let's go enjoy our party, Mrs. Monroe," I smiled. Not because I had won, but because, at long last, I had truly begun.